This is your Sound Off Extra review for WWE Hell in a Cell 2016. I am the Solomonster. The Hell in a Cell pay-per-view just went off the air a few moments ago, and the Instapoll that I put up on my Twitter, at Solomonster, so far, after just a few minutes, almost 600 votes already. 53% thumbs up, 47% thumbs down. A very down-the-middle result so far. It's very early, but almost a split decision so far between thumbs up and thumbs down. This was in my opinion, I would say a thumbs-in-the-middle show. I think that's pretty accurate. There were actually a couple of pretty damn good matches on this show, and a bunch of matches that were just kind of there. This was not a blow-away pay-per-view by any means, but they did make history by taking the women and putting them in the main event. Sasha Banks and Charlotte headline for the Raw Women's Championship, the first time that two women have headlined a WWE pay-per-view, a non-takeover show ever in the history of the company. So how did they do? Well, I guess we should probably get into it here. We'll start from the beginning and we'll work our way down to the main event. The Kickoff show opened with, or didn't open with, but later on in the Kickoff show, Cedric Alexander, Lince Dorado, and Sin Cara against Drew Gulak, Tony Nese, and Arya Daivari. Alexander pinned Gulak with the lumbar check. Fun little match. You know, the guys in this match were flying around all over the place. High energy, high action, exactly what you would want to see out of the cruiserweights. I just went on a whole rant on the Sound Off podcast earlier today about there's just something missing from this cruiserweight division since they came up to Raw. It was just, there's something that we had in that cruiserweight classic and even on NXT that's just missing from Raw. This was the closest thing, I think, since all these guys came up to the kind of cruiserweight match that you would expect. And it was a lot of fun. Alexander, to me, was the real star of this thing here. The babyfaces pulled off a triple dive spot on the heels at one point. But like I said, Cedric, to me, was the real star. I think the people are totally into this guy. He's been incredible since coming back. I say coming back, but coming over from Ring of Honor, he dropped the weight. He was in the Cruiserweight Classic. He's like a new man. And the guy's been just firing on all cylinders. And I think he really, out of everybody so far in the Cruiserweight division, I know there's going to be other guys coming in as they finish up their commitments and whatnot, but to me, Cedric Alexander, more than anybody else, is the one guy in that Cruiserweight division who I look at and I think has universal title potential. I'm not saying he's going to win the championship, but I'm saying in terms of competing at that level outside of the cruiserweight division, down the road. I mean, we're talking probably a few years down the road, but to me, he's the one guy right now that I see who can go much further than the cruiserweight division. So it's a fun opener. Then we had the pay-per-view. Roman Reigns, curtain jerked, opened against Rusev, Hell in a Cell for the United States Championship. Reigns retains the title in a long match. I didn't time it, but this felt every bit of 20 minutes. Tons of weapon shots, kendo sticks, and tons of near falls. And this was just the opening match. I was watching this thinking to myself, I wonder if this was one of those old Ring of Honor like undercard or Ring of Honor opening matches back in the day where every single match on the show would have these crazy, insane moves and near falls. And that drove Jim Cornette nuts once he came in and took over. And he tried to phase that out. He said, look, we can't do this no more. We got to save that stuff for the main events. Can't be doing this in the opening match anymore. That's kind of what we had here. And literally last month we had a SmackDown pay-per-view that opened with the main event. So this is becoming a pattern here. But I mean, they put everything out there, like I said, from the weapons to the near falls and all that stuff. I thought the first half of the match was boring. I just thought it was, okay, whipping him into the side of the cage. Now let's whip him into the other side of the cage. And just, I don't know, a lot of paint by numbers kind of stuff. And the crowd was just kind of just sitting there. The last 7 or 8 minutes of the match, I thought things really picked up. Both guys beat the hell out of each other. They were both bleeding from the arm. Rusev put Reigns in the Accolade on top of the ring steps. He used a chain to pull back on Roman's face. And, of course, it's going to take a lot more than that to beat Roman Reigns. He got out of it. and gave Rusev a Samoan drop on the ring steps and then delivered a flying spear, got the pin. Fans booed Roman for most of the match. The funniest moment to me, it was actually kind of maddening, but it was also very humorous, was Rusev trying to take Roman Reigns and destroy him with kendo stick shots to the ribs. He got Roman tied up in the ropes, like Andre style, the way Andre the Giant used to get tied up in the ropes all the time. And with Reigns caught in the ropes and helpless, instead of pulling the guy's protective vest off of his body, this flak jacket that this guy practically is wearing, he hits him with kendo stick shot after kendo stick shot without taking the vest off. And all the while, the announcers are talking, oh, he's possibly breaking Roman's ribs. Really? Must be a concrete kendo stick. It's just, I don't know. I'm watching this going, pull the freaking vest off. But he never did. I just thought that looked completely ridiculous. But by the time this was over, this was a good match. This was not a great match. Last 7 or 8 minutes picked up, really saved it. But a good match. Bayley and Dana Brooke, boring match. The opposite of a good match. I could literally hear the air conditioning in the building through my TV. Dana worked over Bayley's injured shoulder. The crowd just died a death. I mean, they tried to tell a story with the shoulder, but it just didn't work. And to be fair, they were coming off of a Hell in a Cell match with weapons and near falls, basically a main event match. So they were in a tough position to start with. Bayley won with the belly to Bayley, so the best I could say about this is at least the right person won. Backstage, Chris Jericho barged in on Stephanie McMahon and Mick Foley, tried to lobby for he and Kevin Owens to lead Team Raw against Team SmackDown coming up at the Survivor Series, which is great news because that means that Chris Jericho is not going anywhere right now. He's sticking around for at least a little while longer, which is great news. Enzo Amore and Colin Cassidy against Anderson and Gallows. Enzo was on fire during his promo pre-match. He dropped a Toy Story reference and called Anderson Andy. Any reference to Toy Story gets an automatic thumbs up from me. One of the greatest movies ever made. Anderson and Gallows, I noted on Twitter, made their entrance just as The Walking Dead was starting. How appropriate. Now, I figured they would at least get the win here. I did predict this. I did the whole, Hell in a Cell predictions on the podcast I did earlier today, and I figured they would at least get the win here after all the singles losses, and they did. Not that it matters. I think the damage has already been done to these two guys. They pinned Enzo with the Magic Killer. Best thing, honestly, that they could do at this point with Anderson and Gallows is to just trade them over to SmackDown, because they've already been beaten and vanquished by the New Day. It's very obvious they're going to keep the titles on the New Day until they either break the record the Demolition set or they come close, and that's still a month and a half away. And for now, it's Cesaro and Sheamus feuding with the New Day. So what the hell do Anderson and Gallows do? Right? Let's say they're done with Enzo and Cass, they have another match, and they beat them again. Okay, well then what? There's nothing left for them to do. They've already been just destroyed on this show. Their credibility completely just obliterated. So just trade them over to SmackDown. We haven't seen any trades yet between the brands. Trade them over to SmackDown. They might be able to be salvaged that way, and you could even hook them back up with AJ if AJ needs some backup. That, to me, would be the best thing for these two guys at this point. We had Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins in the middle of the show, Hell in a Cell for the Universal Championship. This was the match of the night. This was an excellent match. Owens set up a table outside the ring at one point and then propped up a second table over the first one, but kind of propped it up against the side of the cage. And later, Rollins powerbombed him from inside the ring through both tables. So Owens took a wicked bump. Looked like it sucked. The back of his head smacked against the table. Chris Jericho had run down to the ring and snuck inside the cage. So what happened was the referee was blinded by a fire extinguisher shot to the face. So he can't see anything. Another referee comes down to try to help him out of the cage, and when the door opened, that was Jericho's opportunity to sneak in, and that's what he did. And basically at that point, this turned into a handicap match, like what we saw on Raw last Monday. I know they called it a triple threat. It was a handicap match, and that's what this turned into as well. We got a basically we got a Jericho match on this show after all. So if you were upset and disappointed that hey, Chris Jericho doesn't have a match on this show, surprise, surprise, he basically was part of this match. After a frog splash that Rollins hit, Rollins had the match won. Jericho pulled the referee out of the ring at the last second. Now later on, Owens is beating Rollins down with just numerous chair shots, shot after shot after shot. Jericho brings another chair in. Owens sets both chairs up. He kind of sits them in the ring next to one another, and he power bombs Seth Rollins through both chairs to get the 1-2-3. So Kevin Owens retains the Universal Championship. After the match, Jericho laid out Rollins with a code breaker for good measure. A little overbooked, but not quite as overbooked as, for example, that Lucha Underground main event we had last week. But this was still a great match. A lot better than I expected it to be. And it's weird for me to say that because of who's involved, right? You've got Seth Rollins, and you've got who may be the best or second best if you think AJ Styles is the best in the entire company, and Kevin Owens, who's also one of the best. So why would this be better than I expected it to be? Maybe it's just because I really wasn't into the build-up. I wasn't expecting much different from what we got last month between them at Clash of Champions, which I didn't think was their best match. But this was great. This was a main event level match. This is what you would expect out of your main event. TJ Perkins and Brian Kendrick for the Cruiserweight Championship. Another boring match. Crowd didn't care much for it coming off that last match. But you know what? I say coming off that last match, and I do think that you have to note that because they just came off the match of the night. But honestly, I think with the storyline that they had going into this thing here, I don't think that the crowd would have been much into this either way. If you would have opened the show with this, they might have been a little bit hotter for it, but not much. You know, the whole story of Kendrick begging Perkins to lay down for me and let me win the match. And yeah, I can't imagine that storyline didn't get over. So Kendrick went for sliced bread number 2 and pretended to land badly on his knee. And Stevie Wonder could see what was going on here. But TJ Perkins is a dumb babyface, so of course he acted concerned for his friend. And when he walked over to go help him, Kendrick gave him a headbutt right to the face and then locked him in the captain's hook for the submission. So Brian Kendrick is your new Cruiserweight champion, which at least means that the win that Rich Swann got over him on Raw last Monday, now it makes sense. Now it all makes sense. We have the New Day against Cesaro and Sheamus for the Raw Tag Team titles. On this night, it was Big E and Xavier representing the New Day, even though, as Kofi Kingston mentioned before the match, this was his hometown of Boston, but he was on the outside for this match. I think he said his mother was in the front row, too. The match itself was okay. It really wasn't anything I actually kind of think the match they had on Raw last Monday was probably better than this. And I thought the finish was just very unsatisfying. But I also mentioned on Twitter that as far as the finish goes, they were in a tough spot because the New Day has this record that they're probably going to break. And even if they don't, they're gonna come right up to the edge of it. And I think it's 478 days. And somebody tweeted me and said that they will tie the record or break the record, I think December 12 maybe is what they tweeted me. That might be a Monday. So we got a good month and a half or so left to go. And so I don't think they want to take the titles off them before then. Well, Cesaro and Sheamus, they've had this storyline going where these guys don't like each other. They don't get along. They're unwilling partners. There's a storyline we've never seen before. But now they're starting to gel. Now they're starting to complement one another in the ring, and they're really turning into a pretty damn good tag team. Even before this match, they had a backstage promo where they were actually being very cordial to each other until it got to the point where Sheamus said, look, you take my lead out there and you'll be okay. And Cesaro said, well, wait a minute, you take my lead. And then, of course, it just degenerated into a whole, struggle between the two of them. But you've got these two guys. I think the inevitable payoff to this is that they are going to win the tag team titles. Well, if you're not going to take the titles off them tonight because of the stupid record, well, what do? Well, you end up with a shitty finish like this. And I guess it wasn't shitty in that it was the only one that kind of made sense, but shitty in terms of just not a very satisfying finish at all. Which was Cesaro had Xavier locked in the sharpshooter in the ring. For a long time, actually, he was locked in that sharpshooter. On the outside, Sheamus was brawling with Big E, and he was brawling with Kofi, and I think he grabbed Francesca too and smashed it on the floor. Anyway, Kofi ended up nailing it with a kick to the head. I think it was Trouble in Paradise, and that was good enough for a disqualification. The referee called for the bell. Cesaro and Sheamus win the match, but they do not win the championship. And Cesaro was very upset when he realized what had happened. I'm sure that'll be a source of great tension between him and Sheamus going forward. This just felt like we got to get through this, right? We've got to get through this to the next show, tomorrow night, to Survivor Series. How do we get out of this? And it was just a very blasé finish. It was just, oh, okay, cheap DQ win. Great. Great for a pay-per-view championship match. And then we had the main event. The main event on this show, the match that headlined, the match that went on last for the first time in WWE history. The women had the main event all to themselves. It was Sasha Banks defending her women's championship against Charlotte in Sasha's hometown of Boston. I thought, now let's take this step by step here. From pre-match to the entrances to the match itself. I thought the video package building this matchup was tremendous. And that is one of the, still to this day, year after year, it is maybe the biggest strong suit that this company has is their production. For all the annoying little things that the production team does, whether it's the shaky cam or some of that kind of stuff, their production team is second to none. These video packages are always tremendous, and this one was no different. Then we get to the entrances, and they had the big elaborate entrances to make this feel like a real main event. Charlotte had what someone on Twitter called the King Haku entrance, which is she had a bunch of guys basically carrying her like a queen on her throne out to the ring. Sasha got the SUV entrance, right? That was kind of the same entrance she got at NXT TakeOver in Brooklyn last year for her match with Bayley. She gets driven out in the Escalade. So this had a big match, main event feel to it. And obviously the crowd was going nuts because it's Boston, Sasha's hometown. Even before Sasha's music hit, they were chanting, "We want Sasha, we want Sasha." This felt like a big deal. So even if you were not one of these people who was a fan of the women getting the main event, I think you have to be fair about it and say they went out of their way to make this feel like a big deal. And at least for me, it worked. The beginning of the match, the cell, so they did something a little bit different for this. For all the other matches, the cell was already down. For this one, the cell was up. Both women came out, they did the intros, and then they were slowly lowering the cell. The cell got about halfway down before Charlotte nailed Sasha, knocked her out of the ring. The cage almost came down and crushed her, but they stopped it. So it's a cool visual, right? The cage is kind of half down. Reminded me of that match Austin and Kane had at the King of the Ring that year, which was not a Hell in a Cell match, but Undertaker Mankind had the cell. So the cell was set up, and in the middle of their match, somebody decided, hey, let's lower the cell. And the cell got about halfway, or maybe 3/4 of the way down, and I don't know, it's a cool visual. So they're brawling outside the ring. They brawl into the crowd. I think they were the only ones all night to brawl into the crowd. So this did not feel out of place, at least not to me. This was like, all right, this is pretty kick-ass. This is all action so far. The fans are into it. I'm into it. This is cool. They brawl back over the barricade into the ringside area. Now the cage is down. The cage is completely lowered. Charlotte begins to climb the cage. So Sasha goes and she starts to climb up after her. Sasha knocks Charlotte down. Not a great distance, but Charlotte falls to the floor. And Charlotte ends up grabbing Sasha and powerbombing her through the announce table. Because they had the international announce table set up at ringside. I don't know if it was the French or I think the German table, whatever it was. Might have been the Spanish one. Sasha took a bad bump, just right through the table. The table practically disintegrated on impact. And they played this up like a big injury angle. And I will say that for at least a brief second there, I saw Sasha laying on the floor crying. I was thinking to myself, maybe she is hurt. Maybe she is hurt. We know she's had a bad back before. Maybe she got hurt. But this was all part of the plan, apparently. I guess what they were trying to do here, this was straight out of the Mankind Undertaker match from King of the Ring, where, Mankind took the initial bump off the top of the cell, and they put him on a gurney, and they're carrying him out, and Undertaker starts climbing down the cage, and there's Mankind. He's fighting off the medics. He's fighting off the referees. He wants this match to continue. And they did the same thing here with Sasha. Now, to me, this went on way too long. The crowd was buzzing at the beginning of the match. It started, it was all action, and then it just came to a screeching halt. And I thought that this just went on for way too long. The crowd got quiet, but I understand why, what they were doing here. And the crowd did come back up when the referee went to announce Charlotte by forfeit as the new champion, and Sasha said, we're not going to have any of that. She got up, she pulled the neck brace off, she got up off the gurney, she climbed back into the cage, said, close the door, and the match officially started at that point. They rang the bell, and off to the races we went. So then we had the match itself, and I thought the match was going well for a while. It seemed to be going well for a while. I was enjoying it. And there was a table that was set up outside the ring. Now, again, you don't have a lot of space between the cage and the ring, but they set a table up out there. I don't know exactly what the plan was. I get the sense that maybe Sasha was going to knock Charlotte backwards and she was going to take a big bump through the table. Whatever happened, Charlotte, they were both up on the turnbuckle, and Charlotte did fall down and fall backwards, but she took a very weak bump onto the table, and so the table didn't break. The leg broke. The actual table itself did not break, and it just looked very, very weak. It was the first botch of the match that I could tell, and it kind of killed the flow of the match there for a little bit. And you could tell Sasha was not pleased. There really wasn't much she could do. She was still up top, so what do you do? I mean, Charlotte, she's laying basically on this table. You can still jump off, but she decided not to, so she just climbs down, rolls her in the ring, gets a near fall. So Sasha goes back outside. She says, the hell with this. She finds another table, pulls the table out, puts it in the ring. That would come into play a little bit later. The story of the match was Charlotte was working over Sasha's back, especially after what happened earlier. Working the back. Psychology. Work the body part. And I thought it's tough because it seemed to me like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was the table that didn't break. I don't know if maybe Sasha was hurt, but the match kind of fell apart as it went on. So it wasn't a terrible match, and I thought it started out hot, but from that point forward, I mean, the effort was there. And look, there were a couple of cool spots. Charlotte, or Sasha, I should say, has the knees in the corner that she does. So she did that spot, but she actually put a chair underneath Charlotte and killed her with the knees in the corner. I thought that was cool. But the match boiled down to yet another table spot. So there's a table set up in the ring, and Charlotte puts Sasha on the table. Charlotte goes to climb up to the top, figuring, okay, here we go. She's going to go for the moonsault. Sasha's going to roll out of the way, and Charlotte is going to take a bump off the moonsault through the table. Instead, Sasha gets off the table, moves the table to the opposite corner, and she sets it up, basically props it up against the corner. I guess this is part 2. Maybe they were going to try to recreate the spot that they had botched earlier in the match. Well, what ended up happening is Charlotte took Sasha and threw her, I guess, into the table, onto the table. The table didn't break. Tried it again. Threw Sasha on top of the table. And now Sasha literally rolls down the table. Table doesn't break, but she rolls down the table. And when she rolls back down to the mat, Charlotte comes from out of nowhere. Natural selection. Rolls her out. 1, 2, 3. And that's it. Charlotte pins Sasha clean in the middle in her hometown to regain the women's championship. I believe they said for a third time. I could be wrong. I think this is her third championship. Charlotte is well on her way to matching her father and becoming a 16-time champion at the rate that they're hot-shotting this title back and forth. So I'm watching this and I'm just thinking to myself, that's it? Like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that was the finish. I was shocked enough that they did the title change, because the title's gone back and forth a couple of times now. Plus, they're in Sasha's hometown. They've got the main event all to themselves. This was tailor-made for a big, heroic moment at the end here for Sasha. And you know what? There were people tweeting me saying, hey, if they want to recreate the dynamic of Kane interfering in that first Hell in a Cell back in the day, they don't have to do it the exact same way with her ripping off the door. But, Nia Jax has been MIA from TV for a while now. Some people have been, speculating it's because they didn't really have anything for her. They wanted the Sasha Charlotte thing to play itself out. And so if this was the blow-off for now, out comes Nia Jax from wherever, and maybe she lays out Sasha when the match is over and sets up the next feud. I would have been okay with that. I don't know how good a match is going to be between Nia Jax and Sasha Banks, but at least it's something new. And they could build up a monster in the women's division. I would have been okay with that. But the finish was just completely anticlimactic. It just came out of nowhere. And it came out of nowhere after a bunch of what seemed like botched spots. I'm not quite sure what happened here at the end. I'm not convinced that Sasha or somebody didn't legit get hurt. And then they showed Charlotte. She's practically in tears. She's got a look on her face like she's upset about something. I don't know if it was just the emotion of having wrestled and gotten the championship. It could have just been that, right? She's the champion again, so she's crying. It almost looked like she was upset. And if she was, I wouldn't blame her, because it seemed like there were 3 or 4 things in this match that just didn't go the way they wanted them to go, and it really killed the flow of the match. So I don't want to sit here and say this was a terrible match. I would say that this was a disappointing match. And it had nothing to do with the effort that they put in. They went in there and they did the best they could. And I thought up until a certain point it was a pretty hot match, but then it just seemed to die. And the finish just killed it dead. So it was disappointing, I would say. And I was one of the people that was just for weeks saying, just give them the main event. Just let them main event the show. Owens and Rollins going into this show wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire. Roman and Rusev, yeah, they were feuding for a few months, but so what? It's not like that's the hottest feud. None of those matches had to go on last. It's Boston. Just give them the main event. And you know what? I don't regret the fact that they did. I'm happy they did. I think it was very cool. I think it was very cool. If Vince McMahon had to be talked into it, as the rumor goes, he had to be convinced to let them go on last. Good on him. Good on him changing his mind. Looking back, what was the best match on the show? It was the match that probably was going to originally go on last. And that also would not have been a fun way to go off the air, with Rollins getting screwed over by 2 guys. But as far as a match goes, that was the match that stole the show. I thought Rollins and Owens easily had the match of the night. That was excellent. Sasha and Charlotte I thought was good. It had the potential to be great, and it fell short. And especially with the ending, it fell flat. I thought it was just very anticlimactic and a little disappointing there at the end. But I don't want that to be the last time we ever see the women go on last. I think at some point down the road, I don't know when, but they should try it again. If they have a championship match that they think is worth it, whether it's Sasha, Charlotte, Asuka, whoever it is at that point, hopefully this is not the last time we get to see the women in the main event, because the one thing I will say is that they did not feel out of place. Even though the match in the end, I didn't think lived up to expectations. I was buying into the match up until the point that it started to fall apart. And that's just because of a series of unfortunate situations, not because I'm sitting there thinking, oh, the women, the women don't deserve to be in the main event. You know what? If you got a good match, if you've got 2 people that the fans are into, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit if they've got something between their legs or not? Who cares? So I say good on them for putting them in the main event. It's just a shame that that the match turned out the way that it did. And before I end here, I the biggest takeaway for me from this pay-per-view, and this really does apply to the main event, and I don't want to blame this on the women, I blame this on WWE. The biggest takeaway from all of this, and from the main event, is that there was no need for the Hell in a Cell. Other than the fact that the pay-per-view is called Hell in a Cell, and it's October, and it's what we do. It's October. Time to bust out the cell. I mean, look at that last match. I mean, there were spots in some matches on this show where tables got propped up against the cage and stuff like that. But honestly, look at these matches up and down the card. Look at that main event between Sasha and Charlotte. At no point did the cell really come into play. You could have done those matches, and maybe even done them better, quite frankly, if the cage wasn't even there. There was no need for any of these matches to be Hell in a Cell matches. They could have had the exact same match without the cell and just make it no DQ. And as I said this earlier on the podcast that I did on the Sound Off, that is one of the biggest problems with Hell in a Cell these days. You could say, well, they don't do blood anymore and they're not as violent. To me, it's just, is the cage necessary or not? What does the cell add to the match? Or does it take away from the match? And I just watched this 3-hour plus pay-per-view. I watched 3 Hell in a Cell matches tonight, and that's the biggest thought that I'm left with here. Why the hell was the cell even there in the first place? And, you know, I say this every year, and I know other people do too, and nothing's ever going to change. It's just what they do. They do Hell in a Cell every year, and that's just what they do. But that's one of the biggest reasons why the cell doesn't mean what it used to. Just doesn't. The only other time recently they busted out the cell on a pay-per-view that wasn't Hell in a Cell was WrestleMania this year. And look who was involved. As soon as they said Shane McMahon Hell in a Cell, everybody knew what that meant. He's jumping off the cage. So at least in that match, for that one spot, yeah, the cage did come into play. The cage was a prop for Shane McMahon to kill himself. That was the whole point. But you look at this show, 3 Hell in a Cell matches. Did we really need that cage? Of course not. So, that's my take on this pay-per-view. Thumbs in the middle. There was some really good stuff. Again, I thought Rollins and Owens stole the show. The rest of it was just kind of there. It was just kind of meh. And I'm going to bring up the Insta poll here to see where we're at. We had just shy of 600 votes when I started recording, and now we're just shy of 1,000 votes. And 54-46, thumbs up 54%. So thumbs up is, we got more thumbs up than thumbs down, but not by much. So still very down the middle split opinion here on this pay-per-view. And that's Hell in a Cell for 2016 in the books. Now we head into the Raw vs. SmackDown stuff at Survivor Series. They were hyping up Goldberg against Brock Lesnar on this show. Very interesting to see what kind of reaction Goldberg gets on Raw tomorrow night. I'm a little worried for him about Toronto. May not be a good night for Goldberg. You can follow me on Twitter at Solomonster. If you want to vote in this poll, by the way, it's up on my Twitter. You can vote right now. I also put this thumbs up, thumbs down poll on there every Monday night when Raw goes off the air. You can listen to the full episodes of the Sound Up podcast. I do them weekly every Sunday. It's just me, myself, and I. Usually they go anywhere from 90 minutes to 2.5 hours, depending on what there is to talk about. And I just put a 2.5-hour show up actually this afternoon if you want to go back and check it out on the Solomonster.com, iTunes, Stitcher, all that good stuff. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back very soon on the Solomonster Sounds of YouTube channel. We do some of these Sound of extras from time to time. I'm sure we'll be doing one for Survivor Series next month. So until then, be well, stay safe, have yourselves a very happy and safe Halloween. And we'll see you back here real soon. Take care, guys.